Assalamu alaikum, ahlan wa sahlan, and peace be upon you, and welcome to Eye on Islam, the new show where we look at current affairs through an Islamic lens. Each week we'll be looking at a trending story from the news world which has a direct relevance to the religion of Islam, and we'll break it down from a Muslim perspective. Today we'll be focusing on the World Cup football tournament, which for the first time ever is being hosted by a Muslim majority Arab country in the Middle East, and whether or not the Qatari authorities have done enough to safeguard Islamic values amid the avalanche of non-Muslim guests and Western pressure.
Has Qatar compromised Islamic principles to host the 2022 World Cup? Amid an intense pressure campaign from European nations to change local laws, some Muslim onlookers fear Doha may have compromised too much to cater for their non-Muslim guests. Qatar has been condemned by the West over Sharia-inspired laws, which ban alcohol consumption, public displays of affection, same-sex relationships, and immodest dress codes. However, Doha has made exemptions on some of these rules for visiting spectators, including fan zones which allow alcohol sales, creating a debate between fans.
Alcohol, I think, is sold in many other places, but it's forbidden to drink alcohol in the street or in the stadiums or other public places. So I'm supporting to respect the Islamic rules or the Islamic countries or the Islamic conditions.
If that's the case, I don't think that should be. I don't think that should be the decision that they should make, especially when they did have plans for international beverages, different tents set up.
I don't want to, I'll be the last person you ask this question. I wouldn't want to see that lifestyle compromised. I wouldn't want to, with my kids and my family enjoying my time out and being confronted by drunken, necessarily, I wouldn't say hooligan, but drunken and disorderly fans.
Criticism of the World Cup's first ever Arab host Qatar was always expected, but few would have predicted the outpouring of anti-Islam sentiment that accompanied it. Qatari authorities have made efforts to showcase Islam during the event also. Quran recitations, pauses for prayer, and inviting famous dawah activists. But does the dawah effort make up for the permitting of haram practices?
Well, joining us in the studio today to talk more about Islam and the Qatar-hosted World Cup is Sheikh Tauqir Ishak, an international lecturer in Islamic sciences, currently the head of Halal certification for the Halal Regulatory Commission, and Roja Mohammed Saleh, a journalist with a specialism in Islamic affairs. He's also the editor-in-chief of Muslim news website 5 Pillars. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on, of course. Assalamu alaikum to you both. Sheikh, let me come straight to you for your expertise on this. I'm very interested to hear what your opinion is on Qatar. Straight up, do you think Qatar has compromised on Islamic values here?
Of course, Qatar has compromised Islamic values, but that's not to be unexpected. Why are we so surprised about that? Just because you're a Muslim majority country doesn't mean you're an Islamic country. You've got half a dozen countries run by monarchies. They will interpret Islam how they like. They will implement the laws they like. We shouldn't be so surprised. We shouldn't have expectations from them. If you're going to host something like this, you can't host it without compromising Islam, unfortunately. The fans want alcohol. They want to experience that drunken state when they're enjoying themselves. They want to have rowdy behavior. That's what it's all about. If you look at the way they entertain themselves, is part of the culture of a non-Muslim. And if you're going to try and mix that with dawah, that's fine, good luck with that. But of course, they've had to compromise, and they are compromising.
I think, obviously, yes, there is that side of the argument. But at the same time, it also seems like the Qatari authorities have benefited quite a lot from a PR perspective, even from some elements of the Muslim community who have seen things like, okay, there is alcohol sales available, but the ban on alcohol sales in the stadium last minute was kind of seen as like a step in the right direction, and there's a bit of dawah activity going on, it seems, during this competition. What's your response to that?
Of course there are positives to this, and I'm glad there is dawah going on, but you can't have dawah over a pint of beer, okay? You've got to have dawah on your conditions and within your boundaries. And to be honest, spending 300 billion on I think 30-day event, which is $10 billion a day. I think there's a lot better ways you can spend that money on dawah, on welfare, on charity, etc. You didn't need to do all this and buy the World Cup. As I said, you've got unfortunately a bunch of monarchies. I suppose they want to adopt the Western mindset, and they want to show themselves how involved and integrated they are. I'm sorry, the two systems can't mix. But they're not Islamic countries. They've never been Islamic countries, and we have to. We shouldn't be so surprised. What did we expect from these countries? Do we expect leadership, Islamic leadership? That's not going to happen. Did we expect representation? That's not going to happen. They're not going to defend. They haven't defended Islam on the world stage. Do we expect Islamic guidance from them? How are you going? We're not going to expect any of this. So why are we so surprised that this is going on? They're already mentally speaking. They've adopted the un-Islamic mindset of Western culture. They should adopt the Islamic mindset of Islamic culture. Then they'll be far more successful and far more respected in the world.
Roshan, I'm going to come and bring you in on this from a different angle because, regardless of what the criticism on Qatar has been, one aspect of the criticism from the Western world, from the European side, is less to do with the fact that, they're compromising on Islam. And it's more to do with the fact that, they are considered a Muslim majority country and that there are elements of the religion present in this competition. What do you make of the Western condemnation?
It's been hypocritical because obviously there was no such focus on, Western states, which have committed far worse human rights abuses than Qatar ever has. I mean, Qatar hasn't invaded anybody in the last 20 years. And, we've got international sporting tournaments being held in Western countries, the UK, France, the US, which have literally invaded and occupied and destroyed countries in recent history, but there's no such focus on them. So it's highly hypocritical, and I really find these footballers that are doing these protests, and they're very ignorant about the issues anyway, but they've never done these protests when the Euros was held in the UK last year, World Cup in France 98, USA 94. So I find it highly hypocritical. And ultimately, even enemies of the West, such as China and Russia, there was criticism of the Olympics being held in China and Russia, the World Cup, there was, but not to this level of vitriol. And we have to remember that, Qatar is a key Western ally. So there's something underlying this campaign. And for me, it's obvious, it's Islamophobia. They don't like the fact that this is a Muslim country hosting an international sporting tournament of this stature.
That is interesting that you bring that up, because there's like two sides here. Is Qatar compromising on Islamic values, but then there is clearly some kind of Islamophobic campaign being pushed from the Western side as well. So it's like they're kind of playing on both sides a little bit. Sheikh, I want to come in and ask you a question which I wouldn't be able to answer. It's a question on Islam's view of the LGBT issue. That's something which has been very prominent in the debates and the criticism of Qatar. But like, alcohol's easy, it shouldn't be there, simple as. LGBT, Qatar has laws against it, but fans of that lifestyle are going to go. How should it be policed? Should they be allowed to go even? Let me pass that question to you.
I don't think anybody should be forbidden going to the country because of their beliefs. So that's part of dawah, that's part of welcoming people. I do support Qatar on this, especially against the victimization they've experienced by the Western press and the politicians that have been attacking them. That's completely unfair and completely hypocritical. Of course, everybody should be allowed to come. Dawah is part of our religion, is part of our deen. So you can't stop someone, you can't ask them questions as to what their political, personal beliefs are. So that's not an issue. Even someone who drinks, you don't stop them coming to a Muslim country. Some Muslims drink because they're sinful, so that doesn't mean you stop them coming to a Muslim country. So that's not an issue. The issue is they've been victimized on these laws. Most of the world is against LGBT. Russia has laws against this. It's not a unique thing to Qatar. All the Gulf countries are against this. This is just an issue that the Western nations have decided to adopt to try and bash Islam, to try and show Islam to be backwards and evil and etc., to demonize a Muslim. to demonize the Muslims. Now, in all the major religions, this type of belief and practice is actually anti-God. It's actually against divine rules, against belief systems. It's not just Islam. If priests and rabbis, forgive me, but if some of them want to compromise their scripture or their belief systems, that's up to them. But in Islam, it's very clear. You have the people of Lut, the Qawmi Lut, people of Lot, Prophet Lot, who are destroyed because of their practices in terms of LGBT. It's nothing new here. This is a very old belief system, and it's a system that is against God's laws.
This is why I'm glad that you're on the show today to address these issues, because again, Qatar's being portrayed by some in the West as a dangerous country. And okay, they have laws against certain worldviews, like on this issue, which the West may not get or agree with. But to say that Qatar is dangerous, or the Islamic world is dangerous for someone like that to visit, at least, that's not true, is it?
It's not true at all. People have felt very welcome when they've gone there. I think people have interviewed fans, etc. They feel very welcome. Although the only complaint they've got is how much they're having to pay for accommodation and for a pint of beer. They're having to pay for quite a lot. I don't know the details, and many of them have actually chosen to live outside Qatar because it's a very small peninsula, so it's very easy to travel actually in and out for matches. But everybody's feeling welcome. They've done their best to make everybody feel welcome. Now, in that sense, that's an Islamic thing to do. That's
yes.
a Muslim thing to do. But if you look at the background, the intention, I don't think, was for dawah for this. The intention was to just show off their credentials and just try and be loved by the world, which is fine, but I'm sure they could have done it in a slightly different way. I can do a lot with $10 billion, okay? I can build
more than that.
a number of hospitals for $10 billion. $10 billion a day. And that's how much they're spending for dawah. I'm sorry, I don't see that's realistic. I don't see that was their intention.
Okay, before we continue our discussion on the World Cup, let's have a look at some other Islamic stories that have been trending this month. Reports from the US suggest that more than ever, Muslim American parents are seeking a spot in Islamic schools for their children. Although the data is lacking on the exact number of Islamic schools across the states, issues including same-sex marriage and a haram environment have been quoted as reasons behind the growing trend. And a British school has become embroiled in an Islamophobia scandal after Muslim students challenged a visit by a self-described gay Muslim. Following a heated exchange between Wood Green Academy teachers and students, a number of Muslim parents have stopped sending their children to the school. Local religious leadership have weighed into the dispute and are preparing a legal challenge if needed. Coming back to Qatar now, one viewpoint which hasn't been platformed so much is internal Muslim community concerns that Qatar's authorities have compromised on some key Islamic faith and Arab cultural values in order to cater for Western guests. We put this question to Qatari commentator Sister Sheikha Al-Murray, who provided her take on the issue.
As a Muslim woman, I know that my Islamic religion and teachings is tolerant to other peoples, and we have this verse that says no compulsion in religion. This is the major thing when it comes to religion. So there's no compulsion, there's no enforcement when it comes to people believing in specific stuff. So how about practices? We are human beings. We are not, free of mistakes, of limits. We are very limited to ourselves and our abilities. We are, we have the ability to do mistakes. That's our culture. Our Islamic culture background reinforce, tolerance when it comes to people of different practices, of different beliefs. Not that we agree with them, but we give them limits when it comes to promoting such practices that affects, public. And this is data that is recognized by the psychological aspect when it comes to promoting such practices and in influencing the public. So when we allow such practices, it doesn't mean that we agree with it, but it's a matter of tolerance, and we are in life in a kind of debate, and we are kind of in a journey of kind of influencing and learning from others. So who knows? Maybe people who drink alcohol, maybe they will be when they are in the Muslim communities, the discussions will be inevitable when it comes to their own practices, their own beliefs, how it's reflected, and how does it affect to their mental well-being and to their overall well-being. So these kind of critical debates, critical discussions when it comes to life quality, I think those people who drinks living in such a Islamic community, they will get to know more when it comes to practices in daily life and how that impact to their own well-being and the community as a whole. So we see life as a journey of learning, and giving them a limited space of specific practices as part of the learning journey and life that we as a Muslim believe in.
Well, we're going to head back to the discussion now on Qatar and the World Cup with my guests Sheikh Tauqir Ishak and journalist Roshan Mohammed Saleh. Now, I'm going to come back to you, Sheikh, on this because you've heard a reaction which is a very typical Qatari response to the criticism, particularly on this issue of Muslim concerns about them upholding Islamic values and so on. Now, ultimately, I think the message that Sheikh was trying to make was that, look, at the end of the day, this isn't a chance. This is a chance for Qatar, for the Arabic culture, for Islam to be seen by millions of people around the world, inside the non-Muslim community as well. And ultimately, yeah, some compromises are made, but we've seen reports coming out of people embracing Islam whilst out there watching the World Cup as well. So do you think that there is any justification that the bigger picture is that, yes, there are benefits to this? Would you concede that point?
As I said, of course there are benefits if you're going to do dawah, but people are going there not for dawah, they're going there to watch football matches. That's their primary reason and that's their primary concern. If they see a little bit of Islam, you can see that anyway if you want to. They're not going to experience Qatari culture because they're living in a very sort of sterilized areas where they have their drinking and they have their matches and they have their hotels. So the dawah isn't being imposed on them, and it shouldn't be. So they've gone there primarily for football, okay? If people convert, they'll convert anyway if they go to Qatar, to be very honest with you. But we are not in the business of promoting haram. Otherwise, you could argue, let's start selling idols to idol worshippers. Let's start manufacturing alcohol and say this is a gift from us as your Muslim neighbor. We're not allowed to do things like that. We're not even allowed to carry alcohol. The Prophet ﷺ just forbade it, and the Quran calls it ithmun kabir. This is a very serious, a very great sin. Alcohol and gambling, and both of these are associated with football. You can't separate that mentality from the fan culture. So yeah, as I said, there are positives, but you do things in the good way and the right way, not in the wrong way.
And what about the sister's point about there being no compulsion in Islam? What's your response to that?
No, she's right. La ikraha fi din, there's no compulsion in Islam, but this is not what this is about. We're promoting a haram culture. I don't agree with that. We should do dawah in a halal way, but we don't need these events as an excuse or a reason to do dawah. Dawah can be done in a much better way. Look, Qatar does a lot of charity work. They do very good charity work for the Palestinians, for Syria, for Muslims in need. This is where the money should have gone. 300 billion is not a small amount. You can end world poverty for a number of years, and that would have been better for Qatar in terms of their publicity, better for dawah, better for all these aspects. As I said, we need to adopt the Islamic mindset, not the Western mindset.
And Roshan, I'm going to bring you in on a point which we discussed briefly earlier. It's about the money involved in the competition. Now, obviously, a lot has been spent. Some could argue that money could have been spent on better causes, particularly in the Muslim world. There's a lot of poverty and so on, warfare going on. What do you think of that?
I think it should have been, and ultimately I do think there are legitimate reasons to criticize Qatar. I mean, I used to live in Qatar for a few years, so I know the country very well, and there are problems with migrant workers. And one good thing about this World Cup is that the focus has been on migrant workers and their conditions have improved a little bit. So we can't deny that.
The numbers on that are disputed, though,
They
Roshan.
are.
Heavily disputed. I think a lot of the heavy figures coming from Europe on this might be exaggerated. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they said there were 6,500 deaths, which I don't think is true.
Hard to confirm, but it is worth
Yeah.
mentioning the Qatari authorities definitely believe those numbers are inflated drastically.
Yes.
So.
And just briefly, a couple of other reasons, genuine reasons to focus on Qatar is, well, what no one talks about is that they have a massive US military airbase there, which was used to launch wars on Iraq and Afghanistan, which is generally used to kind of threaten, intimidate, spy on the Muslim world. That, for me, is their greatest sin, and no one talks about that. And Qatar is also quite a racist society. You have this social hierarchy with the Qataris at the top and then the white Westerners, and then right at the bottom you have the South Asian migrant workers, and whether they're Muslim or not, they're still discriminated against. So there are legitimate reasons to talk about Qatar, and I don't mind people talking about that. But what we've had instead is this focus on LGBT rights and, you know, kind of Western concerns. And because the West kind of has the most powerful voice in world media, even though it's a minority of the world population, you know, we're hearing more about those things rather than, you know, legitimate criticisms of Qatar like the US airbase.
And what about the fact that, you know, like, I hear what your argument is, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and a lot of people agree with you, but I just can't see a scenario where the entire Muslim world just never engages with the non-Islamic world on competitions like this. Do you not see any benefit at all for Qatar?
No, I am of the position that Muslim countries should not host international sporting tournaments like the Olympics and the World Cup, simply because the Islamic price they pay is too high. You know, I mean, the Qatari law has literally been changed this month. They've changed their laws on alcohol, on LGBT, on other stuff as well. They're allowing Israelis into the country. Qatar has no diplomatic relations with Israel, but for this month, Israelis can come in and out of the country freely. So the price they're paying Islamically, from a religious aspect and also from a political aspect, is far too high. Yes, of course we should engage with non-Muslims, but we have to engage on our terms and without compromising Islam. And I say we cannot compromise 1 inch on our deen and our religion. And unfortunately, Qatar has done that.
Sheikh, I'm going to put a scenario to you. Imagine the Qatari authorities, ahead of this World Cup, they reach out to you and they say, we want to do it right. We're going to do it, but we want to do it acceptable for the Muslim world, according to Islamic values, so on and so forth. How would you handle a situation like this?
You can't do it right because they wouldn't allow it if you're going to ban alcohol and you're going to ban, you're not going to change your laws. You can't do it right. So I agree with Brother Roshan. If you want to hold these events, you're going to have to compromise your belief system and then make excuses to yourself why it's a good thing to do, and that compromise is not acceptable. Allah says in the Holy Quran that the Jews and Christians will never be happy with you until you believe what they believe. They will like many aspects of your religion. They will like your honesty, they will like your hygiene, they will like your hospitality. They will not like your kalima. They will not like your kalima tayyiba, la ilaha illallah. And this is exactly what happened when the Prophet came, announced himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the Makkans. They said, look, you can carry on, but just stop saying this. We'll give you everything you need. And he's not going to. He didn't sell his religion, and this is what we're doing. We're selling ourselves. We're selling our religion, and we have nothing to apologize for. We have nothing to feel second-class citizens for. Our morality, our way of life, is directly from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and we should be proud of it, and we should easily be able to defend it because it is haqq. Al-haqqu min rabbik. This is the truth from your Lord. And unfortunately, these governments and these institutions, they're letting down Islam and they're letting down the Muslim world.
Roshan, very quickly, a few seconds left. The Qatari authorities have policed some things, especially non-Muslim fans coming in with like Crusader outfits and trying to bring alcohol in stadiums. Have you enjoyed watching that to a degree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Qataris have stood up for a few things, stadium bans on alcohol and, you know, kicking out the Crusaders, as you say. But ultimately, you have to weigh the positives and the negatives. And for me, the negatives far outweigh the positives in terms of hosting this World Cup in an Islamic nation.
Okay, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you to our guest and for everyone at home for watching as well. We hope you enjoyed what's going to be the first of hopefully many episodes of Eye on Islam, inshallah. Eye on Islam is a show which will not blindly follow the dominating news agendas. We won't be regurgitating generic geopolitical views or cliche stereotypes here, but on all of our programs, you'll get informative views about the beautiful religion of Islam in a brave and unapologetic style. Here we are proud Muslims and love the faith, and at a time when Muslims live in constant fear amid widespread Islamophobia, we hope to relentlessly promote traditional Islam, resisting fitna or modern reinterpretations, and keep the community engaged, informed, and also entertained too. Join us again next week for another edition of Eye on Islam. But for now, Assalamu alaikum.